You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right. Our favorite Wookiee's right-hand man is here to keep us hydrated. I've got some cream sherry over here to drink as we go along. And so we're going to have guests soon, I promise. But this week we are going to be focusing on some of the news. And it's just going to be us, just you and me. Listener, I appreciate you coming on and listening to me talk every 2 weeks or so. We've been doing this every 2 weeks, and I think that's a pretty good schedule. I know sometimes it goes a little bit further, but I try to keep it at 2 weeks, maybe twice a month, basically, coming through with the Monday show. So we're trying to do that, trying to make it easier for folks to come on the show too. So we'll get that in a bit. Okay, well. Of course, as we get started, I would be remiss not to mention the huge elephant in the room that is the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I just want to say it's like super heartbreaking to see so much needless death and destruction of a beautiful country. I've never been there, but it seems like it's probably a wonderful place, and I'd love to go visit at some point. And all I can think of is when I was in France in like 2019, and we visited the beaches of Normandy, and just, there's so much sadness and pain there at the military cemeteries, at the beaches. And I really, when this all started last week, at the end of the week, I really couldn't help but feeling that same kind of feeling wash over us all again, just the sadness and the pain of it all. So, there's no reason for aggression. I just don't feel like that's necessary. But I just, we're going to have fun talking this show about a number of things, but I just didn't want to let that go without kind of discussing it briefly. Yeah, and I guess, Kiev is a city I would really love to visit one day, but sadly it seems that's not in the cards at the moment. There's so many cities around the world that I wish we could visit, but we humans seem to have a problem with each other and want to cause war. And, another thing, is I've been working on producing the audiobook version of Lewis Mumford's classic, The City and History. And I've been working on this probably for 5 years or so. It's been way too long, but, due to the pandemic and some of my laziness, I'm only halfway through, recording it. It's about 550 pages. So perhaps I was a bit ambitious in recording the audiobook with my own voice. But in the book, Mumford discusses how there was a time when humans seemed organized by councils of elders and kinder governance structures. But at some point, the strongman took over, and war has been the way of people settle disputes more often than not in our history as a civilized world. I hope I can finish reading that and editing that audiobook for folks at some point. There's just so much illuminating discussion about how we got here in history and why these things continue to happen. I know for some folks, Mumford's not their cup of tea, but I really do think it's really interesting to look back in the city and history and how cities, and how, kind of power has led us to some of the places that we're at now. But let's move to a few more things that are more local and maybe less sad. First, as I do when I do my solo shows, I want to give you all a heads up on what's coming up on Talking Headways. I hope you all enjoyed the shows with Asal Beetamargs and Paul Lewis recently. I thought those were super fun and interesting. Obviously, Paul talks about a subject that people really love to hear with the capital costs of construction, and Asal's pieces on underground cities was really cool too, and I'm hoping that we can continue to do those type of shows. And coming up, Yona Freemark's annual prediction show is coming. We just recorded that last week, so that'll be coming up. And book discussions also with Jonathan Levine about constructing community, which his book, I saw a piece by Jake Bloomgart in Governing with him, and I thought that was really fascinating. I think we talked about it a little bit on the show, but we're going to have him on the show. He's coming on Thursday to talk about stuff. And we've got Jenny Schutz of Brookings coming next month to talk about her book, Fixer Upper on Housing. Kevin Krizik and David King will stop by as well with their new book, Advanced Transport Planning. So we've got we've got a lot of things in the works, and so hopefully these topics and things will keep on going. I I'm wondering how folks have been enjoying the shows lately. Actually, are they interesting? Do you all want more of a certain topic? Let me know if you have any thoughts on that, specifically theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I can't guarantee that we'll cover the topic, but I always love new ideas and kind of coming up with that stuff. I mostly do the interviews in part because it's on an interesting subject, in part because it makes me read the books, and also because I feel like there's so much information out there that we skim the surface of, and these shows allow us to go a little bit deeper, dig a little bit deeper. And, I personally, because of the newsletter, I'm buried in headlines all day. And so it's kind of nice to get out of that and dive deeper into a subject than just kind of reading the headlines and kind of pulling them out and putting them in the newsletter and sharing them with the audience. But, there's something great about the podcast and pulling people together to talk about something that they worked really hard on. I mean, these books are not easy to write. I'm always impressed when somebody finishes a book, no matter how short or long. It's just really impressive just because of the work it took to put into it. So I hope that we can keep on continuing that. And actually, I have something also that's really cool. Because we cover all these books, we've partnered with bookshop.org as an affiliate. So that means that if you buy the book through the Overhead Wire shop on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. Now, we'd love for you to order from your local bookstores, and if you can, do that. But if you want to support the authors we have on the show with their books and also help us keep interviewing them, that would also be tremendous. All the books that we've ever discussed on the show with the authors are now in the shop. So if you want to check that out, there's a whole list of the books that we've done podcasts on, bookshop.org/shop/the Overhead Wire, and you can find all the books that we've done interviews with, or most of them, I should say. Unfortunately, there is a few that Bookshop doesn't carry, like Nathan Landau's Car Free Los Angeles. But if you want that book, highly recommend picking that one up. But there's a couple of them that didn't make it. But the rest of them are in there, and there's so many in there. And I do apologize too for some of the prices on the more academic novels in there. I think it might be tough for somebody to lay out $150 or so, but there's some cool stuff in there. So definitely check it out. Bookshop.org/shop/the Overhead Wire. And finally, I have an extra copy of Peter Norton's Autonorama from Island Press. They sent me an extra copy so we could do another kind of cool giveaway. We talked with Peter about the book recently, so if you want to read it, we might be able to help you out as well. If you leave a review on iTunes or tweet or post on LinkedIn about the show, I'll put names in a hat and then I'll send it for free to the person who wins. No, you don't have to pay for shipping or anything. I'll just send it. I have this extra book and I want to give it to somebody who really, really wants to read it. So make sure you, put something on LinkedIn, or you can put something on Twitter, tag me at the Overhead Wire, or put a recommendation on iTunes as well. That helps us get discovered, the podcast, by, when people are browsing for other shows. So definitely, it's a really great book. I hope people get a chance to read it, even if you can't get it through the kind of the raffle. But yeah, definitely do that and put your name in the hat, because I'm going to give it out for free. Okay, well, with that said, this is episode 106. We are in session. And before we get to the show, as I always do, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts, if it's working. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. Thanks to the folks that subscribe through podcatchers. It's great that you guys keep coming back to the show. We really do appreciate it. I appreciate all of you for listening too. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as fun. All right. So the news. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest in the newsletter over the last few weeks. You can get the newsletter by going to theoverheadwire.com and 2-week free trial. So check it out if you get a chance. The first story is Paris plans to limit through traffic by 2024. Paris will ban non-essential traffic through the city center over the next 2 years in time for the 2024 Olympics. The low traffic area will cover 5.4 square miles and exempt residents, transit vehicles, and people with disabilities. Drivers cutting through the city center will be fined if they are caught by cameras or police checkpoints. So this was originally by Florent Elan in La Parisienne. It's in French language, and I tried to actually post it on the newsletter as a translated Google page, but it's under a paywall, so it was hard to do. So the kind people, there's a story about it in Fast Company, I think, with Adele Peters, and also Fergus O'Sullivan wrote a piece about it in Bloomberg City Lab a couple of days after that first La Parisienne article came out. But basically, yeah, Paris is going to cut off through traffic, and I think this is a great idea. keep all that traffic that would be going from one side of the city to the other out of the core. So interestingly enough, in the article, apparently, about 350 to 500,000 trips a day are in the core, and 50% of those are through trips. Can you imagine what getting rid of those trips would actually do for wherever you live? I know here in San Francisco it would be amazing. There's a lot of through trips, I think, that people are coming through either from the Bay Bridge, they're either coming from the north or the south. That would be really great to cut down on some of those trips, although I don't think it would be really smart to cut people off, or maybe charge a toll, but maybe not cut people off from going through the center of San Francisco if you're trying to get off of the peninsula through a bridge. But at the same time, in a place like Paris, I think it's great. And this is similar to the Madrid zone, which has proved very popular locally. Somebody was elected after the previous mayor had introduced it, and then they tried to take it away, and there was like kind of a mini uprising to keep that from happening. So definitely very popular. Also, there's an interesting twist as to why this could work out better because of the non-crosstown traffic. People complaining that there will be a reduction in trips for business to the core forget that a lot of the people don't make those trips anyway because there's a lot of traffic that they don't want to deal with. So I'm going to quote the City Lab article here, Deputy Mayor Gregoire, in which he told the newspaper Le Parisien, which we mentioned before, "We hope to prove that the zone can itself be an attraction and boost trade. Already today, customers have been giving up coming in because the traffic is too heavy. When you remove unnecessary through traffic, however, you leave more room for destination traffic." So that's a point that I've been making a lot about urban freeways specifically, but I think that that's a really important point about kind of commerce in cities as well. A lot of people don't want to go downtown or go into cities because they feel like it's too crowded, and part of that is because there's too many cars, too much traffic. And the places are, that are, disconnected by freeways or cut in half by freeways, they're treated as through places and not to places. And what I mean by that is basically they're places to cut through, not places to go to. And I think this is repeated here by the deputy mayor. I think that's a really important point. So by cutting out those through trips, you're actually giving people living in the city an opportunity to go to places that they want to use, they want to go to as a destination. And, it cuts out some of that traffic. So I think this is really cool. Definitely, if I could go to the Olympics in Paris in 2024, I would be amazed. I don't think I'm going to get there, but it would be really cool to see this, in action. And I think a lot of cities around Europe are actually going this way. So it's cool. All right. Amazon's urban expansion ruffles feathers. In San Francisco, Amazon has purchased properties zoned industrial in order to build last-mile fulfillment centers for deliveries in the city. One property in particular that used to house garbage trucks has found local opposition from the California College of the Arts and trade unions. Now, a city supervisor has proposed an 18-month moratorium on last-mile delivery centers across the city in order to extract concessions from the company. This was by J.K. Deneen in the San Francisco Chronicle. I talked about this a little bit more in detail in my newsletter. And, the parcel is kind of over by the Caltrain yards. It used to have a bunch of garbage trucks. It's in an industrial area that has now been, kind of residentialized. People have been moving close by and the land uses have been changing. So they're getting frustrated that this could possibly be, kind of continuing on as an industrial parcel. But, there's something that really stuck out to me about this story. And it's not necessarily about industrial property or Amazon, but it's about kind of this overall fight on land use. And in my opinion, I think the next big urban planning fight will be over these fulfillment warehouses. And it could be Amazon, it could be Target, it could be whoever else. And, the related last mile logistics centers in cities. And it seems like as if we're going to start seeing cities using zoning and land use laws more and more to deal with other things that don't have to do with land use laws, which are things like minimum wage, unionization of the workforce, urban traffic, instead of solutions like congestion pricing or wage and worker laws or appropriate taxes on corporations. And I think ultimately this is what frustrates people a lot about urban land politics. We know we need solutions to these major issues, but the appropriate solutions are cast aside or tied up in national and state politics, and we end up with these urban planning fights that aren't necessary and create increases in costs and time for companies, people living there. It's a proxy fight because cities control land use decisions. How many times have you seen a development project turn into a fight about other things that aren't a roof over somebody's head or a commercial property with some type of business service? there was a whole really annoying, drawn-out thing in the mission recently. I think folks here would know about, where a laundromat couldn't turn into housing because it was claimed by a group as a historic resource and things like that. And so, those types of things, the opposition always goes deeper. It's not just about the land use, particularly. It's about all these other things. And I kind of wish we could just focus on land use, and I focus on housing people, and focus on giving people commercial spaces to shop at or provide services. Give people healthcare, give people minimum wage, give people congestion pricing, give people the appropriate taxation on corporations. And I know that's a state and federal thing, but I feel like trying to control those types of issues with local zoning is not the right tool. And it feels like that's the tool that we're trying to use by doing these moratoriums and stuff like that. And I completely understand that we need to figure out how to make Amazon pay its fair share. I mean, today, I think I saw a tweet. I can't remember if it was Bernie Sanders or somebody else, but Amazon is raising the price of Amazon Prime to $130 from $119 or whatever it is. It's like a small increase. And basically Amazon is claiming, oh, well, this will, allow it, but they allow us to do this and this and this, but they didn't need it because they made record profits last year. And so basically, these companies are just kind of taking advantage of the situation, raising prices, and, wiping out competitors first off, because that makes sure that everybody has to shop at them, and then raising prices and doing all this stuff when they are making record profits. We have this oligarch problem around the world. Don't get me started on that. I'm getting to the point where it's really frustrating to see local land use used as a cudgel for all these other things when we should be doing those other things. We need to think about healthcare. I mean, heck, we're starting to have this discussion about single payer healthcare in California. And, as a small business myself, I pay about $6,000 in premiums to have good healthcare a year. And so if they want to tax me for half of that, or even 3/4 of that amount, so we can have something that costs less for everybody in the state, then yes, please. I hear all these people complaining about, extra taxes for healthcare. I mean, I'm already taxed. I already pay me $6,000 a year. And that's, a huge amount of revenue that I could be doing to hire other people, or spending it on other things that actually help my business. And it's frustrating that we have to do that. So I digress. Anyways, the thing that I think that is frustrating me the most is that we're using kind of land use, discussions as a proxy for all these other things. Okay. Now that that's over. All right. The Texas governor tries to kill a road diet project. The decision to transfer a stretch of state highway to the city of San Antonio is expected to be reversed 6 years after it was approved. Millions of dollars have been spent in planning for a road diet, tree planting, and improved pedestrian and bike access for the road in an area of redevelopment. Many believe Texas Governor Greg Abbott himself complained about the loss of lanes and is pulling strings to stop the project, in fear something will happen similarly in Austin. This was by Rick Casey in the San Antonio report. So in San Antonio, they have, and I can't remember exactly, and I didn't write it down, and I should have, but the city actually, took back the state, or took the state highway off the hands of TxDOT, and so that they could do kind of this big redevelopment project. It's a whole district, and for a mile or so, they're going to do a mile or two or so of this road. They're doing a major redevelopment project. They're doing a lot of housing and commercial and stuff like that. They wanted to make the street from a 6-lane to a 4-lane with bike lanes and all this other stuff. They'd done a bond and approved it, and they've already spent millions of dollars on the planning for it. And everybody really liked it. Even the conservative folks in San Antonio weren't against it necessarily. Bugg, B-U-G-G, who is I can't remember his first name, but he's the head of the Texas Transportation Commission that's been appointed by Governor Abbott. He even, he's from San Antonio, and he didn't even have a problem with this thing. Some of the, Greg Abbott's cronies even didn't have a problem with this thing because it was kind of this redevelopment project, and they were all about it. But the governor just apparently he doesn't like it, so he decided to take it back 6 years later. I don't know if this, this seems very. It doesn't seem right. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't seem right that a governor can unilaterally pull a road back and make sure that it has more lanes and is more dangerous. This kind of feels similarly to what's happening in Philadelphia with one of the roads there, where they're they're planning to do a road diet, and they've been working on it for 10 years, and they had a lot of support for it, and they decided to do it last year, and then they reopened it up when some council members didn't like the results and some local business people didn't like the results, even after all this public input. So politically, it's kind of frustrating because it feels like they're just pulling the strings on the power, and it doesn't seem fair. So the reason why this happened is, in the first place, is TxDOT couldn't afford to keep some roads in West Texas paved that served fracking operations. So they told everybody, well, we're going to go to dirt roads, and people freaked out. And so instead, some of the cities around the state decided that they could take some of the state roads off the state's hands, and then they would have control over maintenance and all those things. And a lot of these are urban roads. They're roads that go through the city. So it's not really necessarily needed that it's a state road. Fast forward to today, and Abbott basically unilaterally pulled it back, and it's super frustrating. It just kind of goes to show that the governor is kind of a total clown on these issues. And also, it's really frustrating too is that it's a part of this larger deal of states preempting cities and what they can do only because they don't like cities. They just don't like the voters in those cities. And so the governors who are more on the conservative side are trying to take away as much as possible. Whereas I feel like, when there are, more left-leaning folks at state government, they try to allow more, which annoys people because they annoys some people locally. I mean, here in California, Scott Wiener and others are trying to allow more housing, people to do more with their properties, and the locals aren't fans of it. And then at the state level in, say, Texas, they're trying to restrict more what people can do because they don't want the more happening. So it's frustrating to see these types of things happen where something was already planned. It was approved locally. There's a major project that's going on, and then it gets squashed. It's so frustrating. Okay. American dream to American nightmare. Dan Barecchia remembers as a kid being excited to visit the big mall coming to the Meadowlands, New Jersey. During the pandemic, he went to visit the place he had taken 16 years to build and billions in private and public funds. What he found was a half-empty space with listless patrons, an illustration of how we spend billions in public funds on consumerism and tax breaks for the rich instead of helping those that need it most. And this was by Dan Barecchia at Current Affairs. This was one of the most popular read items. It was kind of a long read about the American Dream Mall, which is, as I mentioned, it's in the Meadowlands in New Jersey, which is right next to where the Giants and the Jets play football. And it's kind of a big, complex. And I really enjoyed this piece. Imagine thinking about what you wanted to do with your friends as a kid. We all wanted to go to Dave & Buster's or Chuck E. Cheese or something. And now we're not as interested in those types of things. So imagine the mall is going to be great. And then realizing later on it's not so great. But it's also kind of a story about how malls and stores and even online shopping are just about getting you what you aren't just about getting what you need, but continuing this weird consumer as consumed process. It's not really about you being happy about that you got what you needed, but that you're serving the needs of investors and stock owners. That's what kind of the feeling I got from reading this. And I want to read a piece from the article that Dan wrote. Deep down, I knew this place was wrong, and it was painful to witness its careless, shameless, wasteful grandiosity. Visitors who weren't feeling well were told to go home and dream another day. They weren't being wished safety, and once they got out of the mall, they'd go back to their lives, which might or might not include healthcare or the ability to actually isolate or otherwise stay safe during the pandemic. Mainly, mall goers were being reminded to keep consuming. So it's interesting. I mean, Dan loved the idea of this mega mall. And so that's what brought him to go and visit the place and then write the article. Especially, during the pandemic, it seems specifically sad. You can't go out and do these things, but it's kind of a long read, but I definitely highly recommend it. There's lots of backstory in there about the corruption of how it continued to keep going, the really strong inertia about this type of retail and the government entities who follow it, forward by greasing the skids and how that inertia keeps going and going and going. Definitely a fascinating read. Check it out if you get a chance. But the consumerism thing is really, I think it's a kind of a common theme lately. It feels like just kind of over consumerism per se. Okay, and I think this is the last one today. American cities are unsustainable. American visitors to European cities are often frustrated by the difference in urbanism and mobility. But how did American cities get here? American urban residents contribute 6 times more emissions than their European counterparts because of differences in construction and architecture as well as the automobile. If we're going to save human civilization, urban form needs to play a part in that change. And this was by Walter Jagerhaus at Arch Daily, and I think it was also on Common Edge, which is kind of one of their sister or partner sites where they cross-post articles. This was my last one because I really don't want to go into the details too much about the arguments about U.S. versus European cities. I have this, there's this fascinating discussion that is going on about the difference between the two and the time frames between how the U.S. dealt with moderdom and modernism and how Europe did as well. And I think that's the most interesting part to me about this. It's not like the argument that U.S. cities suck and European cities are better, but it's the point at which they kind of diverge. So, because Europe didn't have endless spaces to sprawl that the U.S. did, Walter argues that the towers in the park model grew tiresome much faster than in the U.S. Here's a quote from the piece that I thought was kind of illuminating. By the mid-1980s, Europe had largely turned against the modern urban paradigm. Traditional cities had never included free-flowing space, but defined walkable streets and protected open space in the form of courtyards, plazas, parks, etc. And in Europe, many of these older cities continued to exist, and they could be comparable to the new modern ones, and urban traditions quickly regained popular appeal. So all this specifically ties into the turning point of the oil crisis in the 70s that I think we talked about with Gabrielle Esperdy. We talked about our Places article. And so, I think that's probably the most interesting thing to me is to see and understand when, not why necessarily there's a divergence between U.S. and European cities, but when it happened, and I guess why, but like when it happened and what were the steps that the separation, the separation became true. I'd love to hear more about the splits between the two. Unfortunately, I feel like there's a whole career that could go into researching this specific era and the oil crisis, and then the split between European and American modernists and city design. And I really do suspect that it holds the key to building and designing more climate resilient cities. This split and why it happened and what can be done to kind of change the idea about it. Maybe it can't change because we just have too much space here. And, people always want to sprawl instead of, limited space and property in Europe and other places. I just feel like there's something that needs to be done about urban design and cities here in the U.S. that make it more functional and less auto-dependent. But anyways, definitely check that one out. It's really cool. As usual, I'll have all of these articles in the show notes, and you can check them out and read them. This week's are particularly interesting. I think, they're always interesting, all the articles, and that's why we pick them. But at the same time, I think these open up my brain a little bit more this week, I think. Okay, well, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. I do really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Really, it's super great that folks are supporting us on Patreon. Because it just, it's the extra bit of, help that we need to kind of do the edits on the podcast and Talking Headways and also keep the show going. Definitely, if you can be a Patreon supporter, we really appreciate it. You can do so by going to patreon.com/The Overhead Wire. Again, we've had folks signing up through the pandemic and we really appreciate the support from that. And the Bus Only scarf. I know that's sold out through the store, but they're still available as a Patreon reward for the $10 a month supporter. So if you want one of our Bus Only scarves, you can do so by being a $10 a month supporter on Patreon. Check it out if you get a chance. And also, I mentioned earlier that we're doing, I'm trying to do The City in History by Lewis Mumford. This is something that I've been working on for 5 years or so. Maybe I'm running out of time actually, but I think I'll get it done eventually. I hope I'd get it done eventually. But I do want to mention that we also produced an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic Town Planning in Practice, and which was kind of the precursor to my work on the city and history. But you can get your hands on one by going to raymondunwin.com. The book was on the American Planning Association's 100 Essential Books of Planning. It's the first one on their list. Definitely, and listen to it if you get a chance. It's really interesting to hear, what Raymond Unwin was thinking in 1909 about town planning and how it still can serve us today. Okay, if you have a question or comment, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears. Feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Puppies and Butterflies. This is part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. We just finished season 4 of Disenchantment on Netflix. Nancy and I did. And I'm really jealous of the people who get to watch the show straight through from the beginning because it's super fun. It's by Matt Groening and the same person who did The Simpsons and Futurama, and it has a lot of the same voices you love from The Simpsons and Futurama. But this one is set in a fantasy world with mermaids and elves and steampunk people. You might even recognize some voices from the IT crowd, including Moss and Noel Fielding, if you're a British Baking Show fan. But if you want to get away into this strange fantasy world, definitely check it out. Also, the Olympics are over, so we've kind of gone away from that, but we have just so much stuff that we've been watching on trying to catch up on. So Kids Baking Championship on Food Network. We got Worst Cooks on Food Network. There's Holmes Family Rescue that we've been watching on HGTV, which is really great. I think that show really does the best out of the ones that I've seen about pointing out what you should be paying attention to when you're renovating a house. And not that I'm gonna renovate this floor of the house anytime soon, but I think it's really interesting to learn some of that stuff. And I think that show kind of does it best. The other ones they do the renovation and they show you like one thing, but this one, I feel like they really, they kind of are like, well, the wiring shouldn't be this way and things shouldn't be out this way. And I don't know, there's just something about it that I think Nancy and I really like. So it's pretty cool. Okay, well, that's the shows we've been watching. I'm trying to think if there's anything else fun going on. It's almost spring. Spring makes us happy. I hope that folks are doing well, healthy, trying to, I guess things are starting to open up again. Mask requirements are going to be gone soon. Those types of things. It's going to be interesting to see how we all kind of come back to work and come back to the world. But spring's coming, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So you can find me online on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. Check out our newsletter, sign up for that, 2-week free trial. Check that out. Go to bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire if you want to get one of the books that we've talked about on Talking Headways. And thank you so much for joining us on Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. Thanks for Han Solo for being here. And we'll see you next time.
Talking